Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Daughters of the Buddha, Have No Fear. My name is Alison Melnick Dyer, and I'm a scholar of Buddhist studies. I'm a professor at Bates College, and I'm a practitioner, and I'm on the board of Vajra Dakini Nunnery. So I wanted to thank the the abbess of Vajra Dakini, Kenmo Droma, for organizing this event. And Vajra Dakini Nunnery's mission is to make Buddhist teachings accessible to everyone. So we're focused on offering trainings and practicing compassion and contributing to a new turning of the wheel where women are valued leaders and teachers. And we do this through a variety of programs like this one, all of which are made available through the traditional system of making donations to the nuns. So we thank previous donors for providing this program and invite other people to sponsor similar events in the future. So today we're gathered on the festival of Labap Duchen. So Labap Duchen is a holiday that commemorates a story about Shakyamuni Buddha, who was said to, shortly after having become enlightened, he ascended to a heavenly realm where his late mother was residing in order to teach her the Dharma. And then he taught her for a while and taught the gods and goddesses, and then returned to the earth. And the celebration is traditionally celebrating his return to the earth. But today, we also want to emphasize the great lengths he went to teach his mother. And in honor of her, today we're going to talk about some of the earliest Buddhist women and some of those very early stories about Buddhist women who have taught and practiced the Dharma. So before we start, I wanted to just invite everyone to take a minute and think about who are Buddhist women who you know of, who you've heard of, whose names that you know. And I want to invite you to write those into the chat. So they might be historical, they might be mythical, and so please, go ahead and type in any who you know. Awesome. So I'm seeing Red Tara. I typed in Mingyur Peldrin. Are there others that people know of? If not, that's okay too. Machik Labdrin. Awesome. Roshi Joan Halifax, a wonderful teacher today. Yeshe Tsogyal. Cool. Excellent. So I want everyone to just keep these women in mind as we're going through this program. So today we're going to talk about a few things. One is the Therigatha, which is a collection of poetry attributed to the earliest Buddhist nuns. So this is an old collection of poetry that was completed around the 3rd century BCE. And the poems are said to have been written by the earliest nuns in the Buddhist community. We're also going to talk about a figure named Achi Chokyi Droma, who was a protector deity for the Drikung Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism. And she was a great grandmother of the founder of the school. So we'll learn a little bit about this wonderful grandmother protector figure. And before we do that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So I'd like to introduce Ayya Santacitta Bhikkhuni. So born in Austria, Ayya Santacitta did her graduate studies in cultural anthropology, and then she began training as a nun in 1993 and received her Bhikkhuni ordination in 2011. She is the co-founder of Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery, which she co-founded in 2009. And she is particularly interested in creating sanctuary close to nature and bringing wisdom traditions to the environmental movement. So welcome and thank you, Ayya Santacitta. Oh, and it looks like you're still muted. Let's see if we can unmute you. Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. So I just say it again. So thank you to Kenmo Droma for inviting me, and thank you to Alison for introducing me. And yeah, I want to speak about the Teri Gatha. You know, Teri means woman elders or women who have grown old in wisdom. And Gatha means stanza or verse. So this is 73 verses which have been composed by the early Buddhist nuns, and some of them have been contemporaries of the Buddha, and they come in 16 chapters. And you know, they have been written by many different women from different walks of life, prostitutes and rich heiresses and mothers who lost their children, or women, you know, who have been forced into marriage when they were very young. And even, you know, Maha Gotami, the aunt and foster mother of the Buddha, she also has a poem in the book. And you know, the Teri Gatha is the earliest known anthology of women's literature in the world. And what's also special about it is that it has been, you know, included into world literature because it has such a authentic and such a kind of simple and straightforward language, speaking about the spiritual journey of women, you know, at the time when women had a much harder lives than we have right now. And it's very authentic, very, you know, spoken from the heart with incredible depths and simplicity. And then at the same time also, you know, they give us a glimpse into the possibilities of the mind so that we can also, you know, have that experience for ourselves and see the own potential of our own minds. And it's also, you know, it has a deep psychological wisdom which is breaking through those poems to us. And I have brought a very special modern rendering of those poems by, believe it or not, by a middle-aged man who is a friend of the nuns of Aloka Vihara. And he has been, you know, he speaks Pali very well, or he understands Pali very well. And one day he just for fun, you know, he translated 1 or 2 poems, and then he kind of got drawn into it. And then the poems started, he said, you know, the Teri started to speak to him in some way. And then it ended up to be this book, and he calls it a hybrid between a translation and an adaptation, variations on a theme, and with the intention, you know, to preserve the very personal and genuine, honest manner of speaking of those Teris. And I think the best is just that I share some of those poems with you. And also what I want to let you know is there's currently translations are happening of those poems. I myself translated into German with a other woman. And there's also translation into Spanish, Portuguese, and Polish underway. So those poems have great appeal to modern readers because of their immediacy. I'm gonna start with the poem by Mahapajapati. Mahapajapati, protector of children. I know you all. I have been your mother, your son, your father, your daughter. You see me now in my final role, kindly grandmother. It's a fine path to go out on. You might have heard how it all began when my sister died and I took her newborn son to raise as my own. People still ask, did you know then what he would become? What can I say? What mother doesn't see a Buddha in her child? He was such a quiet boy. The first time he reached for me, the first time I held him while he slept, how could I not know? To care for all children without exception, as though each will someday be the one to show us all the way home. This is the path. So that's the poem by Maha. And then I share with you a poem by Anupama Bhikkhuni. She was a rich heiress who became a nun. Anupama, beyond compare. Growing up, my sisters and I had gold coins for toys. When there's so much money around, being beautiful isn't such a big deal. Somehow we all were. All my suttas started off talking about beauty and ended up talking about money. One prince told my father, "Give me your daughter and I will give you 8 times her weight in gold." That night, my father kept passing me the mashed potatoes and ordered extra dessert for the entire table. For some reason, I was remembering those gold coins and how we sometimes put them in our mouth. The taste of gold is something you never forget. When my thoughts drifted back to the table, my father was staring at my half-eaten pudding. I could see in his eyes that he was doing the math. That night, I cut off my hair, climbed out the window, and walked away. I knew it would be a long journey. At least I was starting on a full stomach. That was many years ago. Looking now at these old hands, I can't help thinking the prince's offer was a little silly. Any day now, the crows and dogs will get all this for nothing. Know your price, my sisters. Don't accept less. And then Nantuttara Bhikkhuni. She was a courtesan before she became a nun. Nantuttara, greatest joy. I spent most of my teenage years running from one bed to another. Any sign of warmth would do. Each worked for a while until they got possessive or mean or boring, or I did. Then I got new friends, shaved my head, and started eating once a day. During the long, lonely nights that followed, I would remember all the nice warm baths, all the late nights and long mornings, waking up next to beautiful warm bodies. One night, shivering on the ground, I started to cry. It's not fair. No matter what I do, the other thing always looks better. Listen, my heart. I know how exhausting it all gets. Don't give up until you are ready to give up for real. And then Sama Bhikkhuni, who speaks about how she was despairing in her practice because it didn't seem to go anywhere. Another Sama song. After 25 years on the path, I experienced almost everything except peace. When I was young, my mother told me that I would find true happiness only in marriage. Remembering her words all those years later, something in me began to tremble. I gave myself to the trembling, and it showed me all the pain this little heart had ever known, and how countless lives of searching had brought me at last, to the present moment, which I happily married. Can you imagine? We have been living together ever since, without a single argument. And then I chose the next poem, speaks about, you know, how we can come to the end of fear, which is the title of today's gathering, by really working with our fear. Her name is Gutta Bhikkhuni, which means guardian. Going forth, which means, you know, ordaining. Going forth is no game. We leave whole lives behind, not just people and possessions. All our wants, all our fears, all the little rituals that get you through the day and tuck you in at night. Only see that all these pretty wooden pieces aren't you and don't belong to you. They belong to the game. I know it's comforting to count up all the squares, run your fingers along the edge of the board, and plan out all your moves ahead of time. The world beyond the table only seems dark, like empty space. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be afraid, especially in these times where there's so much uncertainty. And then I'm going to end with my favorite poem, actually, which is by Vajra Dakini, and her name is translated as Victor. And it speaks about a nun, you know, who goes to her teacher to speak about her practice, and then puts in the practice the advice. And the rest you're going to hear when I read the poem. When everyone else was meditating, I'd be outside circling the hall. Finally, I went to confess. I'm hopeless, I said. The elder nun smiled. Just keep going, she said. Nothing stays in orbit forever. If this circling is all you have, why not make this circling your home? I did as she told me and went on circling the hall. If you find yourself partly in and partly out, if you find yourself drawn to this path and also drawing away, I can assure you, you are in good company. Just keep going. Sometimes the most direct path isn't a straight line. And I think, you know, that's rings so true for me. Sometimes the most direct path isn't a straight line. Because once, you know, we step on the path, we certainly have, you know, certain expectations and ideas how it's going to be. But it's always going to be very different than that. And this poem spoke to me because, you know, knowing that women even 2,600 years ago had those same experiences as I have now, you know, makes me feel very much, you know, connected with a much bigger world and a much bigger sense of time and sense of connection, you know, with being part of this lineage of female practitioners, which, you know, are practicing this teaching since 2,600 years already. So it's a great honor, you know, to be one of them and also to be with all of you today and to draw some inspiration and strength from our foremothers. So thank you so much, and I hand back to you, Alison.
Thank you so much, Ayya Santacitta. That was wonderful. I am next thrilled to introduce Wendy Garling. Wendy has a BA from Wellesley College and a master's in Sanskrit language and literature from the University of California, Berkeley. And she's a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner and a Dharma teacher. And she's also the author of a book called Stars at Dawn, Forgotten Stories of Women in the Buddhist Life. And her new book, The Woman Who Raised the Buddha, The Extraordinary Life of Maha Prajapati, will be out in March with Shambhala Publications. So thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Alison. Excuse me. Thank you, Venerable Santachita, for that wonderful discussion of the Therigatha and your observations. And thank you also to Khenmo La for inviting me. I am very happy to be here. As Alison mentioned, my area of interest is, well, as she mentioned from the title of my book, Forgotten Stories of Women in the Buddha's Life. And that's particularly applicable, I think, today to our subject, today being Labab Duchen, because there's a very particular story about the Buddha's mother. In fact, the whole event revolves around the fact the Buddha went to heaven to teach his mother the Dharma. Normally, we hear about that much about the story, and then we hear nothing more. He gets there, and he teaches the Dharma, but we don't learn anything about Maya in that situation. She's never discussed. She never speaks. We really don't even know why this day is named after her in a certain way in the conventional telling of this story. So this is just an example of the kinds of things that I like to research, because obviously there's a greater context for this story as an example, and there's a greater context across the biography of the Buddha for either brief mentions of women or situations where women have obviously been overlooked or dismissed in the telling of the stories. So that's been my area of study. And I'm really excited because this subject today brought me back to that story, and it brought me back to some of my research and then kind of a little bit more that I added in today. So to begin with, I will say that I learned a lot about Maya in my research, and I was very happy to find what I found. Everything I looked at was from a primary source, translated to English. Sometimes I could do some reading in Sanskrit, but mostly I read in English, and I had mentors who helped me with some of the translations, whether from Sanskrit or Pali or Sinhala or Tibetan or Burmese or Thai. I looked across Buddhist early literature to see what I could find about stories of the first generation of women. These were really the women I was interested in, the women who knew the Buddha. Particularly, that would include his family, the women in his family, and then, of course, his first disciples, some of which were also the women of his family. So I learned a lot about Maya, and I'd like to bring some of that to you in this discussion because it provides such a beautiful context for the holiday that we're celebrating today when the Buddha went to visit her in heaven. So traditionally, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with the fact that Maya is said to have given birth to the Buddha rather miraculously in Lumbini's Grove, and then within 7 days, she dies. And in really all of the traditional tellings of the story, that's kind of it. Maya is gone. She's written out of the story. There's no lamentation, there's no grieving, there's no later reflection, particularly. Maha Prajapati's poem, the Therigatha, does reflect on her sister. There are a few exceptions to what I've just said, but basically Maya's gone. Not only is she gone, but we never knew who she was in the first place, except the queen, Suddhodana's wife and the mother of the Buddha. So what I found in my research was more about her before her marriage. Not a lot, but a little, from mostly Burmese sources. I found out more about her pregnancy, quite a bit about her pregnancy, which is kind of fascinating. And then it is true, consistently, in all the sources I read, she does die within 7 days of the Buddha's birth. And that's attributed to sort of vague reasons, and my conclusion is simply she died as many women die in childbirth or shortly thereafter. She did not survive the birth. And that's actually spelled out in the Chinese Sanskrit Abhinishkramana Sutra. It's the only one that says she could not regain her strength, and due to the weakness that prevailed after the birth, she succumbed. So usually that's the end of the story. But what I was really happy to find, and this is mostly in the Sanskrit sources, so the northern sources, that would be the Chinese translations, the Tibetan and so forth, is that she lives on. And in so doing, she lives on in the imagination of the storytellers. So what they will say is she went straight to heaven, and there she became incarnated as a goddess. So then there are stories that carry forward with her life in heaven as a goddess. And so that dovetails with what we're going to talk about in a few minutes about when the Buddha goes to visit her. So this is not a one-off story that she is in heaven. In fact, we're told in some of the Sanskrit sources that this is what happened as soon as she passed away. She went to heaven. There are a few little notes saying, for example, that she came back to earth almost immediately to reassure her husband who was grieving and to reassure him that she was okay and that she could not feel more joyous at having given birth to this miraculous child. And it's a very sweet passage where she reassures her husband who is grieving for her. There's also kind of what I find a funny passage where one source, I forget which one, says she became a goddess of her husband's harem. In other words, she kept an eye on things even though she was gone. But the point is, in the imagination of the storytellers and many of the early narratives, Maya lives on, and she lives on very specifically in heaven. And one thing I really appreciated about this character, now that she's a goddess in heaven, is she retains all the qualities of a mother. She does not become iconic as a goddess. She does not become she doesn't gain any supernatural powers other than the fact she's a goddess living in heaven. She's his mother. She's Siddhartha's mother. So in all the little snippets and scenarios that we hear occasionally that touch into this, she's still his mom. She's worried about him, or she's keeping an eye on him, or she never leaves that role. And I love that about the storytelling. And it shows sort of the constancy of a mother's love. And you get this feeling that he always sort of had this protector in his life because she was always there and she always kept her eye on him. For many people, that's a very comforting thought about mothers that we have lost. And I think that I've had that feedback a lot in talking about this, that's kind of an image that people can relate to of the unconditional love of a mother that never dies. And what I love about these stories is how this more emotional, this sense of depth appears in the stories, unlike so many occasions in the Buddha's biography where the stories are told they're very sterile and they're very unemotional, and they certainly exclude women, and they're very much about sort of the heroism of the Buddha and his path and so forth. And not to subtract from that, but finding the stories of the women also added such beautiful emotional depth that I think is something we're all missing, that's something I think we can all welcome in revisiting the stories of the first generation and the life of the Buddha. So I'm going to tell you one story that is very clearly spelled out in the Sanskrit Lalita Vistara, which appears in Tibetan and in Sanskrit. There could be a Chinese version. I've seen allusions to a Chinese version or parts of it. Essentially, that's the life of the Buddha, and it has been translated quite a bit, and it's pretty familiar to those who study the life of the Buddha, or even just generally early literature. But what's beautiful in this version of it is Maya appears to Siddhartha, her son. And this takes place, as you know, the Buddha, Siddhartha, leaves home at the age of 29, and he goes off to seek the truth. And he gives up the princely life, and he assumes the life of a mendicant, of a hermit. And essentially, he becomes his practices become so austere that he loses weight and his skin turns dark, and it appears that he's dying. And he is relentless in his determination to pursue this particular path, which he believes will bring him to inner realization. So this story begins when he is unconscious. He is so starving, he's so emaciated, he's corpse-like. And the gods, and in these stories, the gods are, and sometimes goddesses, are watching over him, kind of rooting him on. Come on, Buddha, come on, you can do this, Bodhisattva. Get to the Bodhi tree and get enlightened. And they see him passed out on the ground. And the gods, not having inner realization themselves, think he's dead. And they go to his father and they say, quick, send some help. It looks like he's dying or he's gone. And so that's one version of events. But in the Lalita Vista, they go to his mother. They don't go to his father. They go to Maya. So the gods contact Maya in heaven, and they say the same thing. They say, it looks like your son's dying. Quick, he needs help. Go to your son. So this is a passage from my book, but I'll read it to you because it quotes from the Lalita Vista, and it tells the story, which will give you a feeling of this mother-son relationship, which never ends. And recall that he's now about, he would be in his early 30s. Maybe he's closer to his realization, so maybe in his mid 30s. So she died some 35 years earlier. And remember too, she's not realized, so she has the emotions of a mother when she speaks. Perhaps the most remarkable story that comes from Gautama's near starvation appears in the Lalita Vista, where we find a rare account of a feminine presence during this time. Here again, the gods are very distressed to see the prince's emaciated state. Fearing that he is dying, they turn in desperation, not to Suddhodana, his father, but to Maya. Finding Gautama's mother in her heavenly realm, surrounded by a retinue of celestial maidens, they report to her the terrible news that the prince is about to die. As any mother would, Maya departs immediately for the Naranjana River where he has collapsed. Arriving at midnight, she finds her son cadaverous and unconscious on the ground. Choking with tears, she lovingly sings to him, and this is from the Lalita Vista. When I gave birth to you, my son, in the Lumbini Grove without support, like a lion, you took 7 steps on your own. You gazed in the 4 directions and said these beautiful words, "This is my last birth." But now those words will never come to pass. Asita predicted that you would be a Buddha in this world, but his prediction was wrong, as he did not foresee impermanence. My son, you have not yet had the joys of a universal monarch's splendors, and now you are passing away in this forest without attaining awakening. To whom can I turn to about my son? To whom shall I cry out in my pain? Who will give life back to my only son, who is barely alive? Now awakening in confusion, the Bodhisattva responds, "Who are you? You cry so heart-wrenchingly, with disheveled hair and your beauty impaired, lamenting your son so intensely and throwing yourself on the ground." And again, Maya sings to him, "It is I, your mother, O son, who for 10 months carried you in my womb like a diamond. It is I who now cry out in despair." Gautama now consoles his mother, affirming that Asita's prediction, consistent with the predictions of the gods and all the previous bodhisattvas, will come to pass. Maya should not despair, he says, but she should rejoice, because soon her son will become a fully realized Buddha. An ordinary man, Gautama determines to achieve his goal through his own unshakable resolve without the help of others. He reassures his mother, and this is quoted, "It is possible that the world may break into 100 pieces, and the jewel peak of Mount Meru may fall into the ocean. The sun, the moon, and the stars may fall to the ground. Yet although I am an ordinary person, I will not die. Therefore, do not bring misery on yourself. Before long, you shall behold the awakening of a Buddha." Maya is overjoyed to hear her beloved son's response. In reverence, she circumambulates him 3 times while sprinkling him with flowers. Then, as divine music beckons, she returns to her heavenly abode. Here again, we see Maya's enduring love for her son. Although she has forsaken her human form, she has never ceased looking after him. So that story's forgotten, but it's not hidden. It's in books that are currently in print. And I think it's a beautiful story that carries the narrative of Maya forward. And I think we should remember that presence of her in his life that didn't stop. So now we continue forward in the Buddha's life, and there's one more mention of Maya in a similar capacity at the time of the Buddha's enlightenment. And at this time, as you recall, there's a huge battle between Mara and the Buddha as he sits, or the Bodhisattva, as he's sitting on the Bodhimanda under the Bodhi tree. And he is determined to attain enlightenment on that very spot at that very time. And it's a very, very sort of violent exchange. And of course, we see this as a metaphor for the Buddha's own inner battles in his mind as he's overcoming his own karma and kleshas and so forth, and making his way towards realization. But when the battle finally abates and Mara is defeated and the world is tranquilized and harmonized, Maya, meanwhile, has been observing this battle from heaven, and she's so worried about her son. She doesn't know the outcome. She continues to have faith, but she doesn't know the outcome. And I believe it's in the Sinhala text that says at the very end, when Mara is finally defeated, that Maya is overjoyed and that she descends from heaven to deliver the good news to her ex-husband and to Siddhartha's wife, Yashodhara. And so she shapeshifts in the palace and becomes a servant girl and appears to Suddhodana and Yashodhara and relays the joyous news that the Prince Siddhartha had just attained awakening. And she's the messenger of that news. And I just love this image of her sort of hovering as this whole battle is taking place and worrying about her son. So again, we see Maya, we see the mother Maya that we have mostly never known. So now I want to move forward to the story at hand, where the Buddha now goes to heaven to see her. And this story is important for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's said to be the source of the Abhidharma, which of course is one of the three parts of the canon, the Sutta Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, and the Abhidharma Pitaka, at least in the Pali canon, are the three aspects there. So this is where he delivers those sermons. But it's said that he chose those particular teachings, according to some traditions, because they would most honor his mother. The sutras and the Vinaya Pitakas would not honor her in the same way. He wanted to honor her with the most difficult, the most esoteric teachings. That's one way of looking at it. We're also told that he's now actually at the end of his life. The Buddha knows that he's going to pass away. So this is like 45 years into his ministry. And he sees nirvana and all the signs of nirvana on the horizon. And it's on every Buddha's bucket list to convert his parents to the Dharma as the ultimate act of gratitude for giving him life. And so the Buddha has not yet completed that task at the end of his life when it comes to Maya. Obviously, she died before he had a chance. When he was an infant, so he didn't ever have a chance to teach her the Dharma. Prior to this, he had already converted his father, who, as the king, never became an arhat. But in the very last 7 days of his life, the Buddha went to him as he was dying and gave him teachings. And it's said that the Buddha completely relieved all his suffering there at the end of his life. First, he could relieve his physical suffering. And then within 7 days, after constantly giving his father teachings, his father attained arhatship. And it's said that his father then very cheerfully, even though the Buddha had said he would die in 7 days, the Buddha, or the Suddhodana, the father, very cheerfully turned to the women of his harem, including his wife, Maha Prajapati Gotami, and the women were all weeping, saying, no problem, this is impermanence. And then he proceeded to give teachings. After the Buddha had taught him, he proceeded to give teachings to the women, his wife and the women of his harem. So that was the Buddha's gift to his father. And then, as we know, I always think of Maha Prajapati as the co-mother. I never think of her as an aunt or a stepmother, even though technically she was. She's the only mother Siddhartha Gautama ever knew. She literally took him to her breast when Maya died. And in that way, I have trouble distinguishing which is the real mother, and I call them co-mothers. They're both equal mothers in my view. So in that sense, as his mother, and there are very profound dialogue passages between the two of them, Maha Prajapati and the Buddha, discussing actually her gifts to him as his mother and his gifts to her being the Dharma. It's very beautiful. And we see an iteration of that in this upcoming story with Maya. But obviously, the Buddha had already converted Maha Prajapati, right? Because she had become a nun. So the last person on his list, in his bucket list, was Maya. So because she was in heaven, he had to go there to find her. And what I want to emphasize here is this notion of gratitude is really, really important in the Buddha's biography. And I don't feel that gets really enough attention. His notion of reciprocating kindness and of responding to those who supported and gave to him was really profound and really striking across his biography in his years as a Buddha. And I found a passage I'd like to read to you that quotes him speaking, and it's in the Pali Canon. But of all the people that we should all be most grateful toward, again, are our parents. And he makes that pronouncement many, many times because they have given us life too. It's not just about his parents giving him life, but the teaching is that we should all convey the same sort of gratitude and love towards our own parents. So I'm going to read this and then maybe talk about it a little bit. I don't want to go over my time here. So this is from the Anuguttara Nikaya, if I said that correctly, and it's on gratitude, and it's subtitled Repaying One's Parents. And this is the Buddha speaking in a teaching to his assembly. Monks, I declare that there are two persons one can never repay. What two? One's mother and father. Even if one should carry about one's mother on one shoulder and one's father on the other, and while doing so should live 100 years, reach the age of 100 years, and if one should attend to them by anointing them with balms, by massaging, bathing, rubbing their limbs, they should even void their excrements there. Even by that would one not do enough for one's parents, nor would one repay them. Even if one were to establish one's parents as the supreme lords and rulers over this earth, so rich in the seven treasures, one would not do enough for them, nor would one repay them. For what reason? Parents are of great help to their children. They bring them up, feed them, and show them the world. But monks, one who encourages his unbelieving parents, settles and establishes them in Dharma, who encourages his immoral parents, settles and establishes them in moral discipline, who encourages his stingy parents, settles and establishes them in generosity, who encourages his ignorant parents, settles and establishes them in wisdom. Such a one monk does enough for his parents. He does repay them, and more than repays them for what they have done. So you see, in many ways, he's describing reciprocating what parents have given us, you know, as little children, and how rubbing their feet and washing them and cleaning them and so forth we would do for our parents. But he's also showing there's nothing within the samsaric world that equals the gifts of the parents to us, but the Dharma, which is beyond the samsaric world, Dharma alone is the true form of repayment. So when the Buddha goes to heaven to teach his mother, it's in that vein that he is teaching her the ultimate gift. He wants to convert her, not just to check it off his list, but he wants to convert her so that she too will be free from, because in heaven she's not free. She's just born because of her good merit in a heavenly realm, but she's still not attained realization. And in the Pali context, that would be called arhatship. So there are various versions I found of the Buddha going to heaven to teach his mother. First of all, they usually follow a whole series of miracles that he performs in Shravasti, and he takes off immediately after that. And apparently at that moment, in some versions of the story, he reflects So, where does a Buddha go after performing miracles such as these? And the answer is, well, this is the time to teach your mother to meet this obligation that you have as a Buddha to repay her for the gift of life. So he takes off immediately from there. And there are beautiful descriptions of how he does that, because he's a human being, and how does he get to heaven? So there's these beautiful descriptions of the mountains bending down so he can step on them, and then lifting them up, and then another mountain bends down and he steps on them, and they create these steps so that he finally arrives in heaven. And there are different versions in the Sanskrit sources, a few brief mentions in some of the Pali sources. But basically what happens is he arrives in heaven, and there is a Bodhi Manda. There's a spot for the Buddha to sit in heaven, just as there is under the Bodhi tree. It's sort of the nexus of the universe. So that's his place. No one but a Buddha could sit on it. So he sits there, and he's surrounded by the assembly of gods, and a bunch of miracles take place. And in some of the briefer versions, and most of them are brief, his mother is within this assembly. And in some cases, she's become a man. She's become a god as opposed to a goddess. And here we're seeing the sort of androcentrism of some of the stories where she goes to heaven, but it's considered beneficial for her to be reborn in heaven as a male and not as a female. That's not true in all these stories, but in some stories, I believe in the Sinhala, she's the chief of the gods. She's not Indra, but she's the chief of the gods. And she's male, but sort of ironically, her name is still Matru, which means mother. So they kind of got half of it, but not the whole thing. Is it in the Kanjur? I think in the Tibetan, she does appear as a female. So anyway, she appears in this assembly, and it's very brief, but he teaches, and it doesn't necessarily, when they tell the stories say Abhidharma, but he teaches. And the gods and goddesses who are assembled attain levels of realization. Some say stream entry, some say arhatship. And that's pretty much the end of those stories. I have a quote here that I'll read to you. That's from the Sinhala. And this reflects back on what I was saying earlier about how, well, let me read it first. What she is saying to him also is that her lifetimes are now fulfilled, because over countless lifetimes she had been his mother, and her personal goal all along was to attain arhatship, or realization, and that this was her method. Her method was to repeatedly be the Buddha's mother, and this was the final time. So she says, her son's karmic debt to her has been repaid. Maya says, you who have been born from my womb so many times have now rendered me a recompense. In one birth, from being a slave, I became the wife of the king of Benares, but that exaltation was not equal to the privilege I now receive. From the time of Piyuttamatara Buddha, during an earlier eon, you sought no other mother, and I sought no other son. Now my reward is received. So this is their final meeting, really, because she's now has attained freedom from rebirth in any realm, and he has fulfilled his karmic duty also to her. So that's sort of the usual amplified version. I feel fortunate in uncovering what I think should get much more attention, and that is a sutra called the Maha Maya Sutra that was originally written in Sanskrit and now only exists in Chinese. And that one amplifies this story quite a bit more. And there are some variations in the Chinese. I can't read Chinese, so I really, really hope someone will do the work. This was discussed in an article by a scholar some decades ago, but he himself had not completed a translation, and I don't believe he ever did in his lifetime. But he read it, and he recounted the story as follows. And that is, the Buddha arrives in heaven, and he's sitting on the Bodhimanda. He's sitting in his power place, and he is reflecting on how much he misses his mother and how he would love to see her sublime face again. And again, we're getting this emotional content. And even though he's a Buddha, the narrators include these sorts of details, I think, to relate to their audiences. And the person who overhears him reflecting on how he would love to see his mother again, and he would love for her to take refuge in the Three Jewels. In other words, he wants her to convert. In some places, this person is identified as Manjushri, although he's not the Manjushri from the Tibetan tradition, but his name is Manjushri, a prince. And Manjushri knows where Maya is. He lives up there in heaven. He knows where she is. So he locates Maya, and he recounts to her the words of her son. And immediately her breasts begin to flow with milk. And that's an ancient sort of trope in the stories, where an authentic mother who has not seen a child in a long time, the reunion is authenticated and noted by the fact this mother then starts to generate milk, just as a nursing mother often does, hearing the cry of her child. So anyway, just hearing the words of her son, she begins to generate milk from her breasts. And she says, well, if he's truly my son, the milk will reach his mouth from afar. And this is also a trope in some of the early stories. And so miraculously, her milk travels and finds its way to the Buddha's mouth, and he receives her milk, which authenticates to her that this is indeed her son. So now they're reunited, and she takes refuge and shows him reverence right away. And then in the Mahamaya Sutra, the Buddha teaches her, and what I find striking in this story is it's not clear what he teaches her. It's not Abhidharma teachings, but it's described pretty much as sort of the general Indian teachings of impermanence and so forth. But what happens that is so important is she begins to teach. She's such a quick study that a lot of the sutra is Maya teaching. So Maya begins to teach in the heavenly realms, and she is teaching with her son, obviously authenticating her teachings. But I wish I had the whole sutra to refer to, but I find that exceptional, obviously. She didn't just go and listen. She was totally karmically and, ripened to not only receive them, but she was able to teach. And the Buddha was able to witness that. I find that really striking and really important about this. And we've lost that. And even though we get it from the Chinese now, it did come from the Sanskrit. And we just haven't found, or we've lost those earlier Indian origins of this story. So she's now teaching in heaven as well. What's also striking about the Mahamaya Sutra is in this story, not just the gods and goddesses are in the assembly, but humans, the fourfold assembly from Earth, from Jambudvipa, has also arrived in heaven. So the Buddha and his mother are teaching to a vast assembly, not just of gods and goddesses, but of the fourfold assembly of lay women and men and nuns and monks, and the Nagas and all the supernatural creatures. They're all there. All sentient beings are there, and they're teaching, which is kind of a really grand way to imagine the story. So everyone is learning Dharma, not just from the Buddha, but from his mother. So when the time comes, the other reason he has gone is he wants to tell her that he's going to die. He is, and this is a much more personal message, he is wants to relate to her and prepare her for the fact that he will be passing into parinirvana very shortly. And even though we're told that she's realized all these realized states, once again, she becomes very distraught and sad. And upon his departure, she weeps. And again, we're just seeing this persona of the mother continuing through the stories. So it's all of this. We're holding all kinds of different notions here. So there are various versions of him returning to Earth. And in those, as you know, there's a magical staircase that appears, and the Buddha in a huge assembly of everybody in heaven. This is where everyone in heaven sees everyone on Earth, and everyone on Earth sees the entire cosmology. It's kind of this just huge scene. Some gods descend on the right, which is usually depicted as golden staircase, other silver staircase, and the Buddha is usually depicted as traveling the central staircase, which is jewels. In the Tibetan, I believe it's lapis lazuli. And they descend, and what's interesting to me is waiting for them at the bottom, in most cases, is the king and his assembly and all the fourfold assembly. But there's one story where one of the nuns, in the Sanskrit, Utpalavarna, in the Pali, Utpana, I think, Varna, I don't know, Utpalavarna, is so passionate about seeing the Buddha again, and the nuns are apparently kind of pushed to the back, that she has magical powers, and she magically transforms herself into a Chakravartin monarch, a king. So she's gender shifted, and she's taken on the 32 attributes of a Chakravartin. And so because of her superiority, she and her entire assembly get to go to the front. And she's the one who greets the Buddha when he comes down. That story's also been mostly erased. It appears in more than one source. It appears in quite a few sources. It's said the Buddha scolds her because of her grasping. I think that there could be more that looked into, more could be looked into about that. But anyway, that story I think has also been forgotten, that it's Utpalavarna who is the one who is so devoted that she wants to be the one to meet him at the base of the staircase. And she does through her magical powers. One other thing I'll just say about this story is I was talking about the Buddha and his mother sort of in dialogue and in conversation, and then she's teaching and he's teaching. In the versions, in the androcentric versions where there are no women involved, it's all men, there is the appearance of Shariputra, and he comes up to heaven when the Buddha takes a lunch break, essentially, because the Buddha has to eat once a day. And the Buddha puts a substitute in his place, because gods don't do that. They only need to eat once every few hundred years. So the Buddha puts a substitute and he goes off and he eats and he meets Shariputra. And then he gives the teachings to Shariputra, who takes him back to earth. And in some cases, it's the other prime disciple, Madgalyayana. But my point is, I would say, I've seen this so many times, that the more androcentric stories have often stripped away the women and replaced them with men. And my guess is the earlier story involved Maya and this notion of the two of them, Buddha teaching her and her asking questions and her then teaching the Dharma. I can get away with this stuff. I just surmise that that's an older version of the story, and that she was not only erased, but then the story was tweaked to include Shariputra, and that then Shariputra becomes the number one disciple, who then does the teaching, although he goes back to earth to teach. That's just my guess, but it doesn't pass the sniff test for me when I see women erased and men replacing them. That happens a lot in these stories. So I would say that given what we have lost about this story, there is a lot to remember. And I would also say it, to me, really underscores the beauty of the relationship between the Buddha and his birth mother. And I love this notion of she's given him the gift of life and the samsaric love of a mother, and he's giving her the Dharma. And in other texts, it's called the mother's milk and the Dharma milk. She gives him the milk of the mother and he gives her the milk of the Dharma, and there's kind of a parity. And this is also something I go into quite a bit in my next book, because the same metaphor or analogy is used with Maha Prajapati, that she talks about raising him as a child and giving him the milk from her breasts, but he, as her father in the Dharma, has given her the milk of the Dharma. So it works with both of these mothers in these scenarios. And I find that very beautiful and a very important part of the stories of the mothers in particular that we have lost. So I'm sure I could say more on all this, but I think I'll stop here because we've just gotten to the base of the staircase. The base of the staircase is sometimes said to be, or he went up in Shravasti, but it's kind of unclear where he comes down. I've been on pilgrimage in India where they pointed out the window an enormous stupa and said that's where he came down. And that's, I think, in Samkasya, a kind of a remote village. Anyway, there's also stories around that, which aren't as relevant here, and I don't know that much about. But anyway, so I think it's with many reasons we celebrate Lababduchen. I think we celebrate not just the gift of the Dharma, but the love of a mother and a son. I think we're celebrating the notion of gratitude and how we can bring that into our own lives. I think today's a really good day for gratitude, actually, come to think of it. Anyway, I think I'll stop there, and later, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Wendy, for that. So I think that was a lot between what Ayya Santacitta shared with us and what Wendy just shared with us. So I think now we'll go into breakout rooms for a few minutes and just talk and reflect. And, you know, I think what struck me most about these talks is the idea of remembering, and what does it mean to remember? What does it mean to forget? What does it mean to remember people or events? Who gets remembered or forgotten? And how do, you know, what do we make of that? How is that powerful? How is remembering powerful? And what does this mean for us as Dharma practitioners? So I'd invite you, I'm gonna type all that into the chat. I'd invite you in these breakout groups for, you know, we'll be there for like 5 or 7 minutes. What struck you as most significant in these talks? And think about which events spoke to you, and how does that, you know, how does that impact you as a Dharma practitioner? And also, what can we as Dharma practitioners do moving forward? Who deserves to be remembered and maybe is not being remembered, and whose voices are being heard or not heard? So yeah, so I'll invite everyone to go to breakout rooms now, and then we'll come back in a few minutes. Great. And for those of you, for, you know, those of us who are still here, we can have a conversation ourselves. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what other folks think. I have a million questions for both of you, but I'll turn it over to Khenmo first.
Well, that was just stunning. I love the early poems, and I love that you read Maha Prajapati's poem, and you know, it's so moving. And the information about Buddha's mother is new information for me. So I just found that to be incredible. And when I think of the reoccurring motherhood as a path, how that speaks to so many practitioners, it's just exquisite. Ayya Santacitta, had you ever heard any of the references that Wendy was making?
You know, we have been getting some material on that you are writing this book, Wendy, you know, and I've actually published it in our newsletter also. And I think, you know, I haven't heard the details Wendy was speaking about, but a lot of it I think it's just because we speak about forgetting, who gets remembered and who doesn't get remembered. I mean, it's not a surprise to me, because that's just like how it is down the patriarchal, times, that women always get, either replaced by men or were not remembered very well. And that you were able to find those details. So some, in some kind of hidden places, those things can still be found. And yeah. I think it's great to bring that, to make that available for people. Yeah.
Well, I know there's a lot more that has yet to be translated, and I can't be the one to do that, but I'm really hoping there'll be more and more. I think this is probably the tip of the iceberg. There's so much translation going on right now, and I'm just really hoping more stories will surface and people will recognize their value. Stories of women like this.
Well,
I had a
go
ahead, Khenmo. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Elsie.
So I'm curious. You said several times in the talk, Wendy, that these had been forgotten, but they exist in text form, and so that says to me that someone was remembering them and someone found them worthy of passing down. And I would love to hear more about how you learned about them, or where, who were you interacting with that you got to hear about them. And do you know if these texts are memorialized in the communities where they exist and where they've existed?
Well, in terms of forgotten, I mean, you're right. I would say they were sitting on a shelf gathering dust. A lot of the stories I found were translated in the 1800s by some of the early Orientalists, like Rhys Davids and some of the early people. And luckily, they didn't discard them. And some of the missionaries, actually, who traveled in different countries like Burma and so forth, they made it their job while they were there to translate and learn the local cultures. And so Life of the Buddha became sort of the first thing they did. So there are early lives of the Buddha. There's an extensive bibliography in Stars at Dawn, my first book, that has all of those sources. So when I say forgotten, I mean, I feel they're forgotten in the sense that they don't exist in the mainstream or anything close to the mainstream. I think my own journey began when I was in grad school, and we did sort of just sort of across the board, different sampling of different kinds of readings in Sanskrit literature. And the first story I read that was really a wake up for me in this area was from the Buddha Charita, when suddenly all this emotional content exploded off the pages. Of course, it was poetic literature, and the fact, the emotions of his wife and the emotions of the mothers. And I started to realize the Buddha story was three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. And it was a long time before I picked up those threads. But then I started just, reading the books I could find. And very valuable in the books of the 1800s were their footnotes, because they're all referencing each other. All these early scholars were very open-minded and non-sectarian, and they were referencing each other. So I was more reading the footnotes than anything, because they would cite, their colleagues, and then they would cite the text. So then I'd go off and running and find those texts and so forth. So it took a few years, but it was there in English. So what I'm saying is there must be much more that wasn't translated.
Thank you.
One of the things I loved was the vision of the Buddha and the mother teaching together. And even just hearing that, it just changed my whole sense of where I fit in the history, but that it was seen by the human realm as well. And that there was no other teaching compared to that, other than maybe the Heart Sutra. That to me was just stunning.
Realized too, when I told that story, I was conflating many different versions into one. But I think the main source, if you're interested in following up, would be the Mahamaya Sutra, because that's where those elements are found.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't even translate the whole thing. I just wish someone would, or maybe someone has as a grad thesis or something. I don't think it's out in book form, but maybe someone's doing it as a thesis.
Is it in Sanskrit, that sutra? Mahamaya Sutra? Is it in Sanskrit?
It used to be, but it's no longer, no one can find it. It doesn't exist as far as anyone knows.
All right.
But it was translated to Chinese. And the other part of the Mahamaya Sutra that's so amazing is Maya comes down to earth one more time in this sutra, and it's when he's dying. So she appears at the parinirvana. And the normal version of things, and again, this is where it's a man, Mahakashapa is the last person to see the Buddha when he's dying, and they delay, and then Mahakashapa comes, and there's some miracles and so forth. Well, it's really Maya. Maya comes down, and it's not Mahakashapa. And some people have said, well, that's because that's the Chinese version, and maybe that didn't take place actually in Indian Buddhism. That story was not known, but actually it had to have been known because the Chinese pilgrims, Zhuangzhen and so forth, say there was a stupa that commemorated her coming down.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had fruitful, interesting conversations. So as everyone comes back, I wanted to invite you towards the end of the program. We'll have some time for Q&A and conversation. So if you wanted to type questions into the chat at any point, you're welcome to do that. And we'll be able to talk about those towards the end of the event. So next, I would like to introduce Khenmo Drolma. So Khenmo Drolma is the abbess of Vajra Dakini Nunnery. And in 2002, she took full ordination as a Buddhist nun in Taiwan. And in 2004, she was installed as a Khenmo in the Drikung lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And so in addition to Vajra Dakini Nunnery, her current responsibilities include the Tibetan and Himalayan Nuns Leadership Program. And she also chairs the International Committee for the 2020 Shravasti Rains Retreat. And so thank you, Khenmo.
Now the 2022 International.
Right, now it's 2022.
I want to mention that the quote, Daughters of the Buddha have no fear, comes from the Thai teacher Dipa Ma, who was the teacher of a lot of the founders of the Insight Meditation. And one of their students shared that they were on a plane with Dipa Ma, and the plane started shaking and bumping, and she was terrified. And Dipa Ma reached across the aisle and grabbed her hand and said, "Daughters of the Buddha have no fear." So we're going to look at the questions for a minute, and if you need a stretch or you have to run to the bathroom, let's just take a minute, and we'll just have 5 minutes, but we'll stay on and look at the questions or reflections that come in the chat room, and we've also been discussing for the Facebook folks. So any other questions that you have, Alison or Ayya Santacitta, or reflections?
I just want to say quickly, Khenmo, because you mentioned Dipa Ma. Dipa Ma is actually Indian. She was Indian, not Thai, yeah. And she came to IMS a few times, yeah. She was very, very tiny, and Joseph Goldstein was kind of double her height. So there's a very sweet photo of the two of them walking. It's so sweet, yeah. So, what I wanted to say is I feel very glad about these Tata poems, that now we have this contemporary translate, which is not a real translation, but this rather, it's a hybrid between a translation and an adaptation of the poems, because I think they can be really used in the practice, For example, one day, you get up and you don't feel like meditating, or because you feel a little bit down, you don't have energy. You just open the book and there is a poem, for any kind of difficulty, we might meet in our practice. And just these poems, they are very short and very simple. They can really open up a door, for energy to come forth. So I feel very happy that somebody did this translation, which are so written in a language which really speaks to any practitioner in these times, which we're needing a lot of spiritual energy, to be flowing in order to be able to meet what has been, cut loose now, with all of those chaos energies starting to converge. Even today we had a very good thing happening, and it's a bit less chaotic now than it was just a few hours earlier. So that's what I wanted to share, the gratitude for those poems, that they have been passed on for over 2,600 years, that we can still today, can just go and buy a book and have them. It's amazing.
I agree with you. They're more like doas, the Enlightenment songs, but expressed in the context of an ordinary person's practice.
Yeah.
And I have been referring to them every single Dharma talk. I keep thinking, well, maybe this Dharma talk, there won't be the right poem, but there is.
Yeah, it's very great. If you have to give a Dharma talk, a few poems here and there, it always helps to keep going. Yeah, I do that too.
Okay, I think folks are back now. So I'm going to introduce the Achi portion of our program. Achi is a historic woman. And I think for all of us this evening, hearing the stories of enlightened women and making them visible are just tremendously important, because the stories are both a doorway for us to enter onto the path and a map. And we need to know what it's like to travel from our point of origin, how we will overcome the obstacles that we encounter, and what choices will open potential for us. And we need stories that reflect the realities of all kinds of people's lives. So just as all genders can relate to Shakyamuni Buddha's renunciation of privilege, we can all learn from Achi's demonstration of the strength of enlightened family. And to tell the story of Achi, you see the pictures on the screen, we're going to introduce His Eminence Tritsab Gyabra Rinpoche. He's one of the leading lamas of the younger generation, and he's accepted the responsibility in the Drikung of becoming the regent. So when the head of our lineage, His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche, dies, His Eminence Tritsab Gyabra will take on the responsibility. So he is very precious to us, and he's very devoted to Achi. And we asked him to tell the story of Achi's life because many of the detailed biographies haven't been translated yet. So Kate, if you'd like to key the video.
Hello, Kemola, Tashidele, and Tashidele to all disciples of Kemola. So tomorrow is Lhabo Tuje. In Tibetan we call Lhabo Tuje, and in English we call Buddha descent from the heaven to the earth. So this day is very important to all Buddhisms. So during these days, if we do a practice, whatever practice you do, even like you recite a mantra, Buddha mantra, Om Mune Mune Maha Mune, so multiply a million and million to benefit to all sentient beings. Then Khenmo requests me to give some Achi life story. So here I'm going to tell you about some Achi life story. Actually, I'm thinking all of you are followers of Drikung. I think you know about Achi's life story or Achi's practice. But here I will tell you about Achi's life story. So, Achi Chokyi Droma family is they from in one of the Tibet place called Nanam. So Nanam is a little bit far from the Drikung. It's quite further from Drikung. Then the father and mother all the way came to Nanam to Drikung. So last time in a year 2004, I went there in Tibet one time. I saw this Achi's birthplace is near to the Drikung Thil monastery. So then Achi father and mother, they did not have any children, and also they did not receive any children. So then Achi's father asked one yogi. Then the yogi said, "You should visit to Nepal." Then visited Nepal. Then Nepal, they have this stupa. Actually, Nepal have three main stupa. One is the Buddha, one is the Swayambhunath, one is the further down to the up of the hill. Then Swayambhunath is one of the main stupa in the city, Kathmandu city. Then beside they have a small temple. Nowadays also many people, they didn't have children or did not receive any children, so they go and pray to this temple. I think they will receive children. So then Achi Chokyi Droma, father and mother all the way came to the Nepal and prayed to this temple. And then after that, they back to the Tibet. Then one night, Achi Chokyi Droma father had one light goes into the Achi's mother womb. So which we believe is a very auspicious sign. So then later on, Achi Chokyi Droma mother had a baby. They call it baby. Then after that, then when Achi Chokyi Droma was like 10 years old, then always she's reciting a mantra of like a Thara. Then Achi Chokyi Droma nowadays, no, then we believe Achi Chokyi Droma is emanation of Tara. So that's why we call Achi is emanation of Tara. So then after that, she grew up. Then she went to the Eastern Tibet with some like during earlier time, central those some margin from Eastern Tibet to Central Tibet. So then she met those, like a businessman or merchant. Then she went together with them to the Eastern Tibet, Kham. So Kham is Central Tibet, Eastern Tibet. Then Eastern Tibet, they have very great yogi, which is Achi Gyabra grandfather. His name is M.A. Sudam Gyatso. So Achi Chokyi Droma told him she want to marry with him. Then he said, I don't have anything. I'm yogi. Then he said, I don't want a samsaric life, this worldly life. Then Achi Chokyi Droma herself told to him, I also don't want this samsaric life, but if we get married, we will have a very so that's why I want to marry with you. Then Achi Chokyi Droma told him, don't worry about anything. I will arrange to the dear wedding. Then she did like this use tamaru. Then her left hand have this skull filled up with a jewel. Then they did a feast offering. Then they invited those margin came with the Achi Chokyi Droma from Central Tibet and other guests. Then they had a big wedding ceremony. Then after that, Achi Chokyi Droma and M.A. Sudam Gyatso have this children. Is a father of Jiden Sungmo. So that's why this is the like Achi Chokyi Droma life story. Then Achi Chokyi Droma is a grandmother of Jiden Sungmo. Then she promised, she said, I will protect Drikung lineage and also 1,000 Buddhas and a future 1,000 Buddhas coming. I will protect 1,000 Buddhas lineage. She promised this. Then Khenmo asked me to, my previous he have one architect. Then she because she requests me because I'm related to the Achi Chokyi Droma. So my previous he have Achi text. So this have also one story. He received Purba empowerment from Dunjor Rinpoche in Lhasa. Then after that, he went to the Drikung Tetum. It's a nunnery monastery. It's there nearby have many Guru Rinpoche cave. It's a holy place. Then he did a practice. After that, Achi Droma appears to him. Before appears Achi Droma him, they have a different kind of sign to him. Sometimes like local lady had a dream to him, and also some local people like offering a yogurt to him in a dream. Then before this, he had this vision, pure vision. Then sometime shaking earth. This is all. They have many different kind of sign to appear Achi Droma to him. Then one day Achi Droma appeared to him, and Achi Droma gave a scroll text to him. So then this text is like we call a treasure text. So treasure text this letter is very different and not like a usual Tibetan letter. Then he asked him, his close disciple, to read this letter. Then he, because all upside down, this letter, and then they made a text, edited text, not me, sorry, they edited text, because then my previous, we call it, this is Gongde means pure visions text, or Dharma, So sometimes if they have break like a samaya, or people come to nearby, then he cannot remember all this text in his mind. So, which means we need a very clear samaya. Then his disciple, he asked him to written down this, edit all this text. And he did. Inside have Achi as a lama, Achi as deity, is a pulpa, idam. Then Achi Dakini, so lama, idam, kanto. So this text is, last time I was in America, I did in America some center. So next time if I come to Varma, I'm sorry, your Kemola center, then we will do again this practice together. So then I request to everyone, please, this time we had a very difficult time everywhere in the world, this pandemic. Please pray for the world peace, and everyone have a good health. Then please you practice on Achi Droma. Then hope to see you soon. Please take care and have a good health. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's so lovely to hear His Eminence, and I'm quite struck by how it's echoing the story of Buddha's mother coming to Buddha at different times in his life. So His Eminence was referring to his previous incarnation, and that's the Lama who had the vision and received the scroll. It's incredible for me to reflect on Achi's life. She's, of course, precious to the Drikung. We think of her being the great-grandmother of Lord Jigten Sungön. But when I was contemplating her life for today, there was the sense of, how she was relieving suffering at many different levels. So You may know of people who are having a hard time conceiving or who haven't been able to conceive children. So to come into this world as a miraculous gift to parents who are experiencing that kind of hardship is the first sign. And then as a child, I think we can remember in our innocence, understanding and knowing that compassion was the most important thing and loving kindness was the most important thing. And sometimes we can have such a clear view that gets lost along the way, but it never got lost, it only expanded. So she was known for teaching her playmates and chanting the mantra as she was born. And this expanded. But the other part that strikes me for contemporary women is how she handled marriage. So in that era, women, she was in the early 1100s or the late 1000s CE. Women were practically chattel at that time. And what I'm struck by is she didn't resist marriage, but she didn't submit to marriage. She created marriage on her own terms. She identified who was the appropriate enlightened master who should be the father and arranged this marriage and this miraculous feast. Sometimes they tell the story of, you know, the yogi thinking she was crazy and why should he marry her? And when she demonstrated the miracle of the feast, then he realized it was an exceptional woman. And the third thing I learned from her is being able to see from such a wide perspective that if she had the capacity to raise children with such wisdom and clarity that they could hold her wisdom and clarity in her teachings generations. And so it's 2 generations that Lord Jigten Sumgun is born, who starts the Drikung lineage, which, you know, of course, is international now and lasting until today. But she also said that as long as the lineage came from her family line, then everything would be well within the lineage. And for 15 generations, it stayed within her family line. So His Eminence, as I said, is the regent. So the head of the lineage is no longer a blood relationship to her family, but His Eminence is. And when there was no son in the family or cousin or uncle or whatever to take over the lineage, that was the time when the Mongols came through and destroyed the monasteries, even though, you know, people did their best. And of course, then it rose again. The fourth thing that I find important about her story is that when she died, she accomplished a rainbow body. And this happens in a lot of the Tibetan stories where someone stays in meditation and their elements just evaporate and they move their consciousness into their enlightened wisdom body. But she took her horse and her dog. And so she's depicted riding on a horse. Unfortunately, they don't depict the dog. But my sense about this is her relationship to the natural world, that there was a relationship to nature and to animals and to her enlightened caretaking of animals, and we can extrapolate from that in our time, the planet. So she has all of those teachings, but what I find additionally interesting is that we could be thinking of her in her mother role, as we do with Buddha's mother, or we could be thinking of her in the enlightened child role, but we call on her in the grandmother role. The word Achi and Achi Chokyi Droma is grandmother. And I know so many women who see their role as grandmother as ensuring a legacy of kindness and wisdom in their grandchildren. And we know that sometimes parent-child relationships can be fraught, but the grandmother relationship is free of some of the dissonance that can arise. And there is such a wonderful feeling of being treasured and loved. So when we're learning how to generate loving kindness, we have to access the feeling of what love is and what it's like to receive and be loved as we're learning how to extend the love. And it reminded me, in terms of compassion, we understand compassion as relieving suffering. We understand compassion as beyond empathy, that it's a shaking with, is one of the early Pali translations. So it's feeling the urgency because you feel the same suffering that the other is feeling. But I was introduced to the Hebrew word for compassion, Repaying, which is womb compassion. So they have this quality of kinship and womb and familial treasuring in the aspect of how we understand Achi's compassion. And that level of compassion, along with her wisdom, her enlightened wisdom, allows us to feel so safe with her that we can fully open our hearts and minds to her. And when we fully open our hearts and minds and turn to her in practice, that allows our minds to merge with her mind stream. For that one moment, our mind stream and her mind stream are inseparable, and we're both planting karmic seeds and assisting in the ripening of our Buddha nature. And it allows us to see through her eyes all sentient beings with that regimen, that womb compassion. So when we practice her as a deity, it's learning to see with her fruitional wisdom and compassion, but we access it through her story and through the grandmotherly kinship that we can understand. So I wanted to give you her mantra. Her mantra is Om Mama Sakra Soha, Yardu Sarvadu, Raza Razadu, Mama Du Hung Vet Soha. And the translation of this is, it's very simple. It's essentially, to me, come all the activities and qualities of Achi, and may I achieve this. So may I both receive and achieve the enlightened qualities. And then, Kate, could you put on the two pictures again of Achi? In the pictures, we see Achi as peaceful and Achi as wrathful. The slide that has the two pictures, Kate. Well, it will come on again and we can post them in Facebook. But the second part of the mantra is, yes, thank you. So on the left is the semi-wrathful and on the right is the peaceful. So the second part of the mantra is Yardu, Sarvadu, Raza Razadu. These activities and great qualities are peaceful, increasing, magnetizing, and wrathful. Again, may they be received by me and may they dispel all obstacles, so be it. And so what I receive from this is that her capacity for wisdom is such that in any situation, she knows what to do. She knows when to command no forcefully. She knows when to be peaceful and gentle. She knows when, if someone needs help, she can magnetize the help, and that will open their hearts and minds, whatever situation. She has the quality to work with it. So now we have a video from the nuns at Samtenling Nunnery singing her mantra for you. So if you would put that up, Kate. And these are some of the youngest nuns.
Meje Jana Dagye Satone Korwe Gyatso Kembashu.
They're so sweet. I wanted to also let you know something about the programs we're doing for the future Achis, which you just saw, these young women who are studying at Samtenling Nunnery. So the next photo, Kate. We've initiated the Samtenling Leadership Fellowship Program, and it has two aspects. One aspect is to support the programs that are going on in India. So on the left, you see a leadership conference in which 20 nunneries participated, and we were the behind the scenes support and supervision and encouragement, so that they learned how to create the conference, how to lead the conference and conduct the conference, and it was and to be the presenters at the conference. So it was a wonderful event. And we have a program in which, as soon as COVID allows, we have one of the graduates from the 11-year study program come over to the US, improve their English, and we help them learn how to teach. All right, so the leadership program, one of the cherries each year comes to the US and is put into situations where they can teach, where they can guide Sanghas, and it's not something that they would generally do over in India. So it's a confidence building and meeting with other nuns and Western run nunneries so that they can see what normal leadership is like when the women are in charge. So we also support computer classes and advise whenever we're called on for advice. And the other aspect of our program, in the next slide, Kate, is the International Rains Retreat. So His Holiness Chetseng Rinpoche has built a huge temple in Charvasti. We were just seeing that that's where Buddha left to go visit his mother, and it's where he taught for 25 years. And so he is initiating the traditional 3-month monastic rains retreat. The first was given to the foundational level monks, or the Theravada monks, and the second one was given to Mahayana nuns. So that we hope will be in 2022. But it is an incredible signifier of making women visible, making the nuns community visible, trusting in their leadership, and inviting some of the great Mahayana teachers to come together. And then as part of the leadership program, we are inviting Tibetan nuns to join the bhikkhunis there so that they will be advancing in their training towards bhikkhuni ordination. So now I'd like to turn the program over to Joanne. And Joanne's going to tell you what it's like to do a program at Vajra Dakini.
Thank you, Khenmo. It was just beautiful. I'd just like to greet all of you with us here tonight and share a little bit. As all of us are navigating our way through these changing times, I'd like to share with you a little bit about my own personal journey and my personal experience of virtual Sangha through the programs at the Vajra Dakini Nunnery, which are facilitated by Kenmo Droma. My very own family has been traveling through the challenges of birth, old age, sickness, and death through the last 6 months of this COVID global pandemic. And having the ability to join in on the Zoom programs established this past spring by Khenmo has been so very comforting to me. Through my own family's journey of multiple illnesses and a family death and coping with separation and isolation that comes with this pandemic, I, like so many others, have experienced so many emotions. The weekly meditation practices offered online via Zoom have helped me. Together, we sit quietly, we practice Tonglen with the help of Kenmo. This loving kindness practice helps me recognize that I'm not alone and that I can reach out to others who, as Kenmo says, are just like me. This practice is so beautiful. The 3-day retreats that we do in silence have been a wonderful gift to explore and develop mindfulness through sitting meditation, breathing exercises, and body exercises, walking meditation. And they're also helping me to explore more deeply my mindfulness. Over the last 6 months, we have developed a beautiful Sangha, which is a great gift of presence. And together with the Sangha members, we are growing our compassion and finding community. On Sunday mornings, we meet, we study together, and I love when we get into our breakout small groups, being able to share our thoughts, our feelings. It is such a wonderful way to explore each week and develop our friendships. Through this virtual community, I have experienced loving kindness and compassion. And during the last 6 months together, we are growing our compassion and our peace through our practice together. I am personally grateful to have the opportunity to share through Vajra Dakini Nunnery this virtual Dharma. In my life, especially at this time. Thank you, Kenmo Droma, for creating this sacred space. It has been a great comfort to me to have the virtual Sangha and access to the Dharma in this way. May it bring comfort to others as well through these difficult times that we are all moving through together. Thank you.
And Tita?
And
Thank you, Joanne. I'm Tita Warnemont. I've known Khenmo for about 35 years and have supported Vajra Dakini Nunnery since its inception. And I want to invite you to join our virtual Sangha that Joanne just talked about. Kenmo Droma hosts 3 Vajra Dakini Sanghas each week. Sunday Dharma Talk, a short meditation discussion, 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Morning meditations, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 to 8 a.m., a wonderful way to start your day. You can go to vajradakininunnery.org and just click on the homepage where it says, join our virtual Sangha, or Sunday Dharma, or morning meditation. I always get a new way of looking at myself, others, and situations I'm dealing with. I hope you'll join us. As we come to a close, I'd like to thank those who made this presentation possible. Thank you very much, Allison, for hosting our program today, a very special Buddha's Mother's Day, Daughters of the Buddha Have No Fear. Love that title. For the illuminating exploration of our legacy and how we are all turning the wheel in this very moment in which women are valued leaders and teachers. Thank you, Ayya Santacitta, for coming to us from Alika Vihara Forest Monastery in California and sharing those contemporaneously relevant and touching poems of Buddhist nuns from 2,600 years ago. You heard it, 2,600 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy Garling, for sharing lost stories you've collected that give us insight into the life of Maya, the mother of the Buddha, and especially the constancy of her love for the Buddha, including after her death and their karmic relationship with each other. Thank you to His Eminence, Tritsab Rinpoche, for joining us via video and giving us the life story of Achi, grandmother and protector of the Buddha's teachings and the Drikung Kagyu lineage. And a sweet thank you to the young nuns of the Samtenling Nunnery in India for sharing their Achi chant with us, which I know we will never forget. Thank you, Nancy, for running the chat room and helping us create community as we speak and type and chat. And thank you, Joanne, for sharing your own experience with and gratitude for the virtual Sangha. And a special thank you to Kenmo Droma for being the inspiration of this program and for expanding our understanding of Achi, explaining Vajra Dakini's Drikung Nuns Leadership Fellowship Program, and how the Vajra Dakini Nunnery supports nuns in India and around the world, past, present, and future. And thank you, everyone, for coming and talking with us. We trust in our interconnectedness. All efforts are appreciated. Thank you all for joining in the merit by participating and in donating for this and future events. Be well, stay safe. See you in the virtual Sangha.
And His Holiness was reminding us that on the Bob Duchen, everything's magnified 100 million times. So thank you, especially Alison, Ayya Santacitta, and Wendy. Really, it was such a joy to hear your offerings.
Thank you, Khenmo, and thanks everyone who is here listening and engaging in this conversation.
Khenmo, in the 1 minute we have left, do you want to tell us what inspired you to offer this wonderful program today?
I have always thought that there has to be more to this story. You know, it can't just be the returning. When I heard Wendy speak on Maha Prajapati, and that, you know, learned a little bit about her work, I thought, oh, this is really going to illuminate why this holiday was important. And Ayya Santacitta is a very old and dear friend, and I love the book. The First Free Women is the title of that book. So I found that a tremendous inspiration. So again, thank you really everyone for joining with us to spend this time together, especially on this holiday. It's been absolutely a joy. So thank you so much for your presence here with us.
Thank you, Khenmo and all.
So farewell. Stay
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.